la, la, la. Welcome once again to the Letterman podcast. I am Mike Chisholm, your tour guide on this cavalcade of irreverence, but not irrelevance. Celebrating the greatest body of work in broadcasting history, that of David Letterman and Company. We have one sponsor on this show so far. And we're happy to say that it is Rupert G and the Hello Deli. So Nestle, isn't that great? Caissie, there's Caissie, there's our guest. We're gonna give her a proper intro, but Caissie's here, and I love when I say that, how many of our guests get that little when I say Rupert G and the Hello Deli, one of the kindest humans on the entire planet. Rupert G runs the soup and sandwich shop along with his business partner May in the womb of the Ed Sullivan Theater. Go for a sandwich, go for some soup. But if you want official Late Show with David Letterman merchandise, like this mug, like actually I think Scott's book is still there. I think you can still get Scott Ryan's book, The Last Days of Letterman, there. Rupert G t-shirts, all of that stuff. Please go to hello-deli.com and retrieve said merchandise. Rupert will pack it with care himself before he sends you the package, and if you ask him really nicely, he may add onions to it. So we're really excited. The trajectory of this show is certainly it has gone a lot quicker than I ever anticipated that it has. I'm so grateful. I love doing this. Broken record saying that. Today's guest, I'm really excited about today's guest. Many of you know that I also host a men's mental wellness podcast. It's a personal development kind of a thing. And in that show, many times, I'm a big fan of personal development. I'm a big fan of watching the evolution of success, the evolution of somebody working towards their dreams. We've got a guest here who basically started her show business career trying to figure out what she was going to end up becoming with the folks at Worldwide Pants. Very, very cool. Her self-described when she started working for David Letterman in 1993, at the time where I don't know if there was a celebrity more talked about in pop culture than Dave. If there was, there weren't very many of them. Started her career in show business right at the epicenter of that madness, and I'm really excited to have seen her not just go and stay in the Pants family, but to move away. Ended up working at Rosie O'Donnell, became a writer, and then a showrunner for Busy Phillips's show. Amazing trajectory. I love that. Busy, of course, suffered a setback, but they have continued on and weathered on. And not only that, are creating some really cool content. Busy Phillips is Doing Her Best is the podcast that Caissie is currently on. I want to talk about Letterman stuff. I want to talk about the trajectory that led her to where she is right now. And for those of you who haven't heard of that podcast, but are extreme David Letterman fans, in October of 2020, I think, no, 2020, October 2020, David Letterman actually appeared on that podcast. So if we want a bit of a gateway drug into how awesome a show Busy Phillips is Doing Her Best is, you've got it right there. And also, I would also like to say that if you haven't seen it yet, we're going to post simultaneously with this. We're going to repost. Walter and Company have put up Caissie's staff memories on the Letterman podcast, or the Letterman YouTube channel. So we're going to post that up as well. Caissie St, Onge, thank you so much for taking time out of your really busy schedule. This is awesome having you here.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here. Excited to meet you.
Oh man, I think I'm more excited to meet you, but hopefully those tables might get a little bit closer before the end of this show. That would be really, really cool. I want to start at the beginning. I want to actually, not to pick apart what Walter and Company have put up, but I mean, when I saw that highlight reel of your favorite moments, and the way that they expertly edited them all together, right there, holy smokes, were you ever thrown into a storm of excitement and show business when you started with the Late Show?
Yeah, I really was. I mean, it was a confluence, a perfect storm, I guess, kind of. I went to a small college in my hometown. I lived at home, a rural town in Massachusetts. I'm a farm girl. And so my college required that you do an internship, and this is like not to toot my own horn, but I graduated from college in 3 years and that's not because I'm a super genius or anything like that. It's really just because I was working the graveyard shift in a nursing home to put myself through college, and I really just wanted to get through it. I just wanted college to be over. I wanted it to stop being a thing that I had to pay for so that I could just get a job and, live my
Yep.
life. And so my internship came up really fast, and my college, God bless them, my advisor said, you know, we can set you up with this lighting rental warehouse in Boston. And I was like, lighting rental warehouse. Okay. I was like, let that be the backup. I had some inkling that I wanted to be a writer. And so someone from my college had done an internship at late night
Hmm.
some years before. And my boyfriend, who is my husband now, but he was already living in New York, also went to the same college, and he was working at Comedy Central. He had been an intern there and had been hired there. And so I let the lighting warehouse be my backup, but then also got my boyfriend's boss at Comedy Central to say, "You definitely have an internship here if nothing else pans out." And I applied at Saturday Night Live, and I just applied at everything that was in New York. And I got a call from late night, because it was still late night at that time, asking me, can you come in for an interview? And so I was like, yeah, sure. And this is back in the days when like internships didn't pay anything,
Yep.
and you sort of had to just figure out like how you were gonna, like, there wasn't some dormitory that I was going to live in or whatever. So I took the bus to New York City, went in for my interview, and I met with Susan Schreier, who is our internship director. And she just was like, I'm just going to take you around. And this is at 30 Rock. I'd never been to 30 Rockefeller Plaza.
Hallowed grounds in
Hallowed
entertainment.
ground, I
Yep.
mean, for entertainment. And so she was like, I'm just going to take you around to the department. And so I very early in the day like met with a writer, and then just got met with another writer and met with another writer. And I was having a great time talking to all these guys that you were just talking about,
Hmm.
Steve Young, Steve O'Donnell. I remember that conversation because he knew everything about my hometown, and I was like, are you from nearby there? And he was like, no, I just know stuff about towns. And I was like, okay.
Which Steve was that? That
Steve
was that was
O'Donnell.
O'Donnell.
Yeah. Steve Young is from Massachusetts, so we had that in common. But yeah, but just meeting with all those guys, and it was going on for such a long time, and I sort of was like, I'm not one to be like, I'm killing this or whatever. I'm not. That's not my. Excuse me. Sorry to cough on your podcast.
Are you kidding me?
That
Cough away. Any bodily function is acceptable on the Letterman podcast.
that is not who I am. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. Hold on one second.
That's okay. A tasty beverage is also encouraged.
Yes, I'm like trying to, I don't know why I have a frog in my throat. But yeah, so I certainly at that age wasn't confident in what I was doing, but I was like, these writers are really meeting with me for a long time. And so maybe like, maybe I kind of have a chance at getting this internship like in the writing department. And then Susan came and found me, and she was like, where have you been? And I was like, oh, I was meeting with like every single writer. And she was like, they already picked their intern like 2 weeks ago. And I was like, oh. And she was like, they're just talking to you. They just like to talk. And I was sort of like, oh, okay. And then so I was kind of like, peaks and valleys, right? I was like, well, I guess I wasted my whole day talking to people that didn't need an intern. And she was like, well, there's one more office that needs an intern. So she brought me in to talk to this woman, Lori Diamond, who I didn't know who she was at the time.
Oh man. And
And
it's okay,
she,
hold on.
yeah,
It's probably good you didn't know who she was at the time, right?
yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, who knows? Yeah, I just knew that as soon as I got there, she introduced herself. I'm Dave's executive assistant, and we need an intern. And just at that time, like Dave came out of his office and he was like asking for something, and then, they're very polite there, so they were like, "Oh, Dave, this is Caissie. She's here to interview for an internship." And so because he's the interviewer that he is, he just took over the interview and he was like, "Cool, where are you from? Where'd you go to school? Cool shoes." And then he was like, "Well, pretty much the only thing my intern needs to know how to do is drive a stick shift. Can you do that?" And I was like, "No, sir, I do not know how to drive a stick shift." And he was like, "Okay, great. Nice to meet you." And I was like, "Great. Okay, bye." So then I kind of thought like that's it, that's it, and I'm not getting this job. And so I guess I hung out in the city for the weekend and then went back home and was like, it might be the lighting warehouse, it might be it might not be worth it for me to go and do an internship at Comedy Central. That
Yeah.
might not, because also we were talking about, like, not to get too personal, like our parents were kind of old fashioned and I didn't have any friends in the city. So our plan was to kind of, like, my boyfriend and I live together to share expenses mostly,
In a
um,
time where people would at least raise their eyebrows at certain people from a certain place and time and mindset could,
yeah, and
yeah.
especially our parents, and
Yeah.
especially because I was a little bit younger for a person who was just about to graduate from college. And yeah, and so, and also, by the way, when we were applying for apartments, um some apartments wouldn't rent to people that were not married. So I think we were saying that we were married on some of our applications. That's the early 1990s, everyone.
You and
Um
I are from the Gen X generation where we can
yeah.
look at our baby boomer parents and we can look at the millennial offspring and beyond, and kind of go, okay, it was a different time. You got to
Yeah,
understand it was a
it
different
sure
time, and we can say it
was.
from many angles right now, can't
Yes.
we?
Yeah, it sure was a different time. So, yeah, so I was just getting very anxious about what my future was going to be. And then finally got a call from Susan saying, like, uh, you got picked to be an intern in Dave's office. And I was like, "Oh, that's so weird. Like, is that a mistake?" I, like, we specifically discussed how I can't do the one thing that he needs someone to do. So over that summer, I knew that I had to report for duty, like, I think August 15th. And over that
Holy
summer,
cow. That's 10 days before.
yeah,
That's like during test shows, right?
yeah. Well, I don't know if it was before test shows for sure.
Okay.
But yeah, so I made a half-hearted attempt to learn how to drive a stick shift. It's just not something that's like in my DNA. Never going to be in my DNA, I don't think. I think there's a reason we've evolved away from it as a society, which I know Dave would disagree with. So anyway, yeah, so I didn't really, I mean, in a pinch, I guess I could get one down the street. But anyway, yeah, I went back to New York. My husband and I said that we were already married and got an apartment in the Village together. And like that was enough for, I think we also told our parents that we were going to live with a third friend because that seemed more innocent. But we weren't. So it was just us. And yeah, got a tiny apartment in the Village, really tiny. Like I burst out into tears when I first saw it because my husband had like gone and done the recon
Yeah.
ahead of time. And whenever I saw it, he had described it to me as it's about as big as your bedroom back home. And like I lived in a modest house, a modest Cape Cod cottage. And so I was like, okay, we could like both squeeze into like a room and live in a room the size of my bedroom. It was not even close to the size of my bedroom in that cottage. So yeah, so I burst out crying. And it was just, like, it's so wild. New York is so much bigger than Boston, which I hadn't really been to that many
Yeah, it's
times.
gigantic.
Yeah, and just a whole different world. And like you have to remember, this is like pre-internet. This is pre, just I'd only ever seen it in movies. I think I'd only ever been there once on one day trip to
Hmm.
like a museum. Um, so yeah, so I reported to work, and one of my first jobs was to like fetch things from 30 Rock that were in the old late night offices and bring them over to the Ed Sullivan Theater, which they were still working on, right up until the
Wow.
last minute. They were bringing in the set, but they also had just completely like this was like a derelict, abandoned theater basically.
Yeah.
And so they had completely restored it. And so
In record
yeah,
time, in a
in record,
very, very short period of time.
yeah, very short time. And so it was something that they were just working on right up until the last minute. And as I was getting there and moving Dave into his office, um, Kathleen Ankers, our set designer, was, moving in the set pieces. And so it was a really, really cool experience to see, just that show, like to start my first show on a fresh show that was
Yeah.
just starting. And then, it premiered and it was a smash hit. And I got it probably in my mind somewhere. Oh, I'm like a lucky charm, like this is somehow because of like my good vibes that I brought to this place. No, I didn't think that, but I
I,
did develop that feeling over time.
I gotta ask you about this though, because I mean, I appreciate you being, playful about this, but at the same time, farm girl, you know, head down, graveyard shifts, college, getting through it, done. Um, you and your alleged husband at the time, working for Comedy Central again, an upstart at that point. We just
Yeah.
had Vinny Favali on the show. That's just dropping the day after you and I record this.
Oh,
I
great.
mean, it's so. And then you going and working for at the time, you talk about smash hit. All eyes in America were on the Late Show. Like
Yes.
it was massive.
Yeah.
I get the impression that at the time you did not understand the gravity of what you were a part of when it comes to the annuals of television history.
I mean, it was hard to know, again, like I had no experience in the space.
Yep.
And also like I just had probably not as much, here's the truth, probably not as much pop culture experience because I had been working like pretty extensively at jobs since I was like 14. So I
Right.
didn't like watch a ton of television in that way,
Yes.
And so where I knew Dave from is that like when my parents were still married before they divorced when I was 10,
Mm-hmm.
we had like a main TV in the house, and then my bedroom was like in the den where the second TV was.
Yep.
And my dad would come in and watch late night. He would sit and try to like watch late night quietly on the edge of the bed where I was sleeping.
Oh
And
wow.
he would laugh and like shake the bed and wake me up. And I'd be like, ugh, what are you watching? And so, I mean, and I had to have been young because like well, I was young and half asleep, but from my understanding, he was watching Letterman from the electric company. And so it took me like a while. I was like, why do they put Letterman on late at night
Oh,
when
that is
kids can't
precious.
see him? And so then it took me like a little while to be like, oh, this is a different guy. Oh, his name is Letterman. Okay, he's like a different guy. Got it, got it, got it.
That is so
So
precious. That's fantastic.
so that is that's my earliest memory. And then in college, like it was the kind of thing where like again, I was working the graveyard shift. So I went to work at 11. So
Yep.
I would like maybe catch a couple minutes of it. I mostly knew about it from like guy classmates of mine talking about it and like
Yeah.
repeating the top 10 lists and, the bit that Letterman did last night. So that was like mostly, and again, pre-internet, so there were no clips to
Yep.
like, to review or whatever. So it was kind of weird to just it was kind of weird, it was weird just because like I didn't know. It's like when they say like if you don't know what you can do, like if you don't know that you can't walk across a tightrope or
Yep.
whatever, that you'll just do it or whatever.
If you
So
don't
I,
know
I
that there's a
think
limit there, you don't even think about it and you just do things. And
exactly.
oh,
So
I
I
gotta tell you,
was
I gotta stop you with that comment right there,
sure.
because we've had so many folks. A lot of the writers have talked about this. Steve Weiner, in particular, is one I could think of who, when he was on the show, he talked about the idea that right from the very beginning, like from Dave and Merrill, right from the very start, they like to bring folks in who didn't necessarily have a ton of experience because they didn't build these imaginary boundaries that we build inside of our heads and limit ourselves. They
Yeah.
brought in people without a ton of experience, just for that very reason, because the malleable, the idea that they could be a little bit more experimental and maybe do something that isn't conventional. It's very cool to hear that that seems to be some of the spirit of what got you the gig. Even at that point when they were as big as they were,
Yeah.
changing the show the way that they did.
Well, for sure. I mean, I wasn't extroverted all of the time. It would be like a situation where I would have to get my courage up to like speak to someone or, just a little bit. And when I first got there, I was definitely like sheepish and trying to like lay low and stay out of the way. But I did when I got my courage up and when I had a minute alone to chat with Dave early on, I was like, hey, by the way, why did you even pick me to be the intern in your office? Like we met that day earlier in the summer. You asked, could I do something? And I couldn't do it. And so why did you pick me? And he was like, oh yeah, actually, I saw your I saw your resume on the reject pile. And he was like, I looked at your name and I was like, this girl has a weird name. Like just there, that's like gonna be trouble for her. She has a weird name. She went to a not great college, which I could identify with. Like we didn't go to the best
Yeah.
colleges in the world. He was like, I remember that I said I liked your shoes and you said you got them at Marshall's and you were so like weird. And then he just was like I was gonna go buy those shoes at Marshall's. Like he was roasting me a little bit. But then he
Yeah.
was like, and then about the car thing, I just figured, you're a smart girl, you'd figure it out. If you can't drive the car, you'll figure it out. You figure it out. So
Did you ever
we
have to?
I only ever did one time and I probably could have gotten out of it. But the way that I got around it is that we had a receptionist at the time, this
Yep.
guy, Lonnie Hart.
Okay.
And he was so funny and so great and such a nice guy. And like he loved Dave's car. And so
Which car was it, or was it a plethora? A
there were a
revolving.
few different ones.
But the one you drove,
The one that I drove was a
Porsche.
Dodge Viper,
Oh
maybe?
wow.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not
Um,
just a stick shift. There's also a learning curve to the learning curve on that bad
I
boy.
mean, it's ridiculous. I think that's what, like a red Dodge Viper, I want to say. I have a terrible because that's how removed from my universe this all was. But anyway, yeah, so every day I would cover the phones while Lonnie would go down and
Right.
park the car. And then he would be back in 5 minutes, because the garage was right down the street. And so it worked out fine. And Dave also had another intern at the time, and she totally could drive a stick shift and it was fine. So, so whenever it was my turn to park the car, I would just get Lonnie
You
Hart to park the
collaborated on
car.
that project,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
together succeeded. The
Exactly.
story about you getting the job, and I mean, you told it so well. Again, you are a broadcaster as well, with what you do, told expertly. How many times in your life do you think you've told that story?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, a million, a
Yeah, I was
thousand.
gonna
I don't
say.
know, a lot.
I was gonna
People
say, and
always
I
want to
appreciate.
know. People always want to know how'd you get that, and I'm like, it was just luck. I mean, really, like my resume being in the wrong place at the right time. You
Yeah,
know.
I appreciate you telling the story to set the stage for everybody here. I certainly don't want to get you to retread things that you have done. Oh yeah, now I got to tell this story again. I got to tell
Oh
that
no,
story again.
I don't mind.
Well, I appreciate it very much, but I'd rather go down some new roads of things that
Sure.
you haven't talked about. If there was one misconception or one thing that, and I'm totally putting you on the spot here, but you're a professional, you can handle it. If there was one thing that if there was a misconception or something that you wish people would ask about that time, what's something that you haven't talked about when it comes to that particular period of time, um, that maybe you'd like to kind of get out there?
What would I like people to know about that particular time? I just feel like it was an interesting time because there were so many people who were legendary at what they did, but then they're all just like folks, all just like guys.
Yeah.
And it was mostly guys. Like I'm gonna be real. It was mostly always guys,
Yep.
which we'll probably talk about a little bit more later in my journey. Nice guys, great, a
Sure.
lot of great guys. But yeah, they were mostly just like regular people and approachable and just a lot of them really willing to share what they knew with me. And again, in a case where like I would get my courage up and ask somebody like, "Hey, can you take a look at this thing that I wrote? Can you take a look at this joke that I wrote?" Bill Sheft in particular was such a mentor to me, but everybody, I mean, I don't Donick Cary holds a very special place in my heart. John Beckerman as well. Um, Rodney Rothman is one of my favorite people in the world, remains one of my favorite people in the world. He came there after I did.
Yep.
But we are the same age. And so, which was interesting because just I had a couple years there where all of my interns were older than I was, and so that was weird. And then Rodney was like the first like person who was my same age, and it was kind of like when you realize everyone in your class is the same age in elementary school or whatever, but we were
Yeah.
sort of like on that level. But yeah, just everybody was kind of regular and approachable and like just finding out like what their gig was, like like Bill Sheft was like warming up the audience but also like arranging the monologue, and
Yep.
and that was really cool to me because that was a separate job than like what the other writers were doing. And yeah, and there were a number of amazing women there as well, just most of them weren't on the path that I wanted to be on. So
Right.
so Jude Brennan, Barbara Gaines, tons of amazing women behind the scenes, but those are two very special women to me, but they weren't writers. So
Yeah. Well, okay, so that's the good. I'm really. It's like you're a professional and you know how to segue. Holy smokes! I'm really fascinated by the idea of the small town farm girl, self-professed, also feral. I love how you describe yourself as feral when you
I
showed up
was
there. That's so great.
100% feral. I mean, like, and I've said this many times, but I'll say it like, there were so many things that I thought about Dave, like, oh, he has a lot of quirky behaviors,
Hmm.
like he has a lot of like does a lot of really quirky things. And one time I was telling someone like, and they were like, "Well, what do you mean?" And I was like, "Oh, for example, like when we're walking down the street together, he always like jockeys to get on the other side of me. Like what, like the side that I'm on, he doesn't like it and he like switches it up." And they were like, "Describe to me what you mean." And so I was like showing them like, "Okay, so we're walking down the street and then he'll like physically move himself to be outside of me." And then they were like, "No, sweetheart, that's manners. Like a
It's a
man,
traffic thing, right?
yeah, like an
Yeah.
old-fashioned guy will walk near the traffic." And I was like, "Oh, I never heard of that. I don't know what that is." you know. But just, yeah, a lot of things where I was like, oh, he has like, he stands up when you come to the table like at a dinner. Okay. I guess I never saw anyone do that. Yeah,
Okay,
so
so there's a good example of the feralness, yet at the same time, you knew you wanted to be a comedy writer.
yeah, that's because of the Muppet Show and
Oh, right on. Oh,
Dick
that's
Van Dyke.
fantastic. Really?
Yeah, I was like, well, I mean, Dick Van Dyke made it seem like it was real easy for a lady with a bow in her hair to be one of three writers on a very important TV show. And then the Muppet
Wow.
Show, I loved that it was like a show about a show, like behind the scenes at a show.
Yep.
And when I was very little, I wasn't, I guess, not the smartest little kid, but I was like, I want to work on the Muppet Show. And I like thought that I would like work with the Muppets. Like Kermit would be my boss and Scooter would be my colleague. And then when I guess I was like bright enough to read, when I got old enough to read the credits and I saw a bunch of like human names, and I was like,
It's
oh,
not
there's
just
a
Gonzo. It's
yes, there's
also
like, yes, there's people that are in
this guy named
charge of
Jim.
this. Got it, got it, got it, got it, got it. So yeah, so then I was like, I want to work on the Muppet Show. I want to work behind the scenes on the Muppet Show. So yeah, so those were the two things that made me really like be like, I want to do comedy. I want to be a writer. I want to make up stories. But it's weird because I think the only person that ever thought that I was funny was my dad. Like no one ever told me that I was funny in my life,
Yep.
fully through college and me being like at the Late Show. Yeah, nobody ever was like, you're the funniest. I mean, I was creative, but just not, never, no one ever thought that I was funny except for my dad.
Okay, I really am excited to explore this element here. So there's many examples of writers on the show who started as interns and didn't even necessarily know, they weren't even cognizant that they wanted to be a writer, but ended up it was almost like being part of the family was more important, and everything can be kind of learned or evolved after that point. But being the sensibility of who you were and how you fit in, to the group,
Yeah.
was the most important thing. 3 years you were there, and again, when it comes to Late Show, at the time of this recording, we've just hit the anniversary of the 29-year mark of the very
Yeah.
first Late Show on CBS. Um, in that 3 years, I hate that we're jumping around, but I like that we're jumping around because it's kind of just we're all over the place. At the end of this, you're moving over to Rosie, right? Did you leave
Yeah.
Late Show to go to Rosie? And were you writing anything? Were there any elements that you kind of wrote other than your on-screen appearances, which we'll get to too? But
Yeah.
other than that, were you contributing to the show in a writing way in any way at all? And did you
Yes.
move over to Rosie for that?
I was I have told this story before, so I'll make it quick. Dave,
Okay.
speaking of manners, Dave was big on sending letters. And that was one of my main jobs, is to write letters from him, short, sweet letters, thanking people whenever he had to ask anyone for anything, congratulating people for things. He's really old fashioned and he loved a typewritten letter. And so that was a huge part of my job. And I loved doing that. Again, got my courage up to be like, hey, Dave, if I'm writing these letters and they're coming from you, in some cases where it's appropriate, should they not be funny? And he was like, I mean, I guess, but
Oh,
like
wow.
they need to really be funny. Like they can't be corny or bad. And I was like, okay.
In other words,
And
they kind of got to be in my voice.
yeah, they got to
Yeah.
be in your voice, which is like the most important lesson for any writer to learn, is that, you have to, it doesn't do, in fact, Dave told me that like right off the bat, it doesn't do you any, it can be the most brilliant thing in the world. And if it's not right for the person's voice that you're writing it for, then it's not useful in that application. So yeah, so I started writing jokes into letters and I felt very safe doing it because he was so particular about the letters. He would sit with a stack of letters and a red pen and like make corrections, to like how he wanted you to tweak the letter or
Oh my
whatever.
God. Now you're really in college. This is the real
Yeah.
education right here.
Yes, it was like an
Wow.
MFA, and he was so great, and he would do it like late at night after the show was taped, and had already been put to bed, and it was like kind of the last thing that he'd do before going home. So he would like be kind of like relaxed and leisurely about it and talk you through it and say like, what you're trying to do here is the rule of threes, but in the rule of threes, it's best to put the funniest thing last. You have it in the middle. This one, you're like telegraphing what the punchline is. And then in this one, you know, you have extraneous stuff after the funniest word. So just cut that back. And then once you know all these rules, then you can break these rules, but you have to know these rules. And so it was really, really like a fantastic education.
I am blown away by these words here. And as you've told this story, like you know, the Nick Cage again, please go onto the Letterman channel and watch the Nick Cage, Caissie talk about the Nick Cage story. It is
Yeah, how great I learned those lessons.
It is so good. Like, oh my God.
Oh.
But you talking about that right there, there are, you know, well, when you go to our listenership, dozens, but there are thousands, tens of thousands of people who, if they heard what you just said, and maybe one day they will, that is, what a moment, what a beautiful piece of life, a unique moment that many people in the business, even to this day, legends would cut off their arm for. Like,
I was so, again,
wow,
like right place,
he's
right time.
He's a comedy mentor in such an
Yes.
intimate way,
Yeah.
a unique way.
Yeah. And meanwhile, you know, I was just I had just been an intern like seconds ago. I got hired at the end of my internship at the
Yeah.
holiday party. That was exciting.
Really? And did you
Yeah.
know?
No, I didn't know. It was like we had our holiday party, which was exciting. That was supposed to be the end of my internship. And I was like, what am I gonna do for work? You know, I think I'm gonna stay in New York. Am I gonna, maybe I'll be a CBS page, maybe, you know, that
Yeah.
was like a natural kind of thing to go on to do at that point. And so we had our holiday party was an ice skating party at Woolman Rink in Central Park. And Dave asked me if I wanted to skate around the rink with him. And it's so funny. It sounds like a scene from a romantic comedy, but there with zero romance. But as we were skating, he said, "Have you had a fun time in your internship? Do you like New York City?" And I said, "Yes, yes." And he said, "Would you like to stay?" And I said, "Yes, think I'm going to stay." And then he said, "Would you like to stay in the job that you're doing and keep working in my office?" And I was like, "Oh, yes. Yeah, of course." So, yeah, so it's exciting. And I got to come back and tell everyone that I was staying, and, you know, that was exciting.
Beyond.
Yeah. He's big on like a gesture, like a, you know,
Yeah.
which is nice because again, like growing up on a farm, there's not a lot of gestures and not a lot of like making you feel like you're plucked out of a crowd or whatever. And he's really good at that, at making you
What
feel
kind of a
like
farm was it, Caissie?
a dairy farm.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We didn't own the farm. We just lived on the land. So I just had like that farm adjacent experience and worked on and off doing things there, I guess, as much as I could stand when I was a kid. But I knew in my heart that I was not ever going to be a farm girl,
Yeah.
or a farmer. But yeah, so writing letters then turned into I really started to study like the people that did the monologue, the people that contributed to the monologue. And so like we had people that would fax in jokes and I
Yep.
would of course like devour them before I brought them in to him. And the monologue jokes would be on like blue copier paper. You know, everything that was a monologue joke was on blue paper so that it could be differentiated from anything else.
Can I ask you a question at this point?
Sure.
Were any of them Carsons at that point?
Um,
Because Johnny Carson famously became the most famous faxer that nobody knew about until, you know, at the end or whatever. But did you ever see any Johnny Carson jokes come across your
not
desk?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Not that I know of. Other people would sometimes, I think Steve Allen called one time to ask me to write down a joke. Um,
Jesus.
and give it to Dave. And I was like, okay. A lot of fun calls. That was the one of the best parts of working in the office. But yeah, so I would really study like what went in, and then he'd check them off and ask me to run them to Bill Sheft so that Bill could start building the monologue.
Yep.
And so I really had like such a lucky position to be in because I was reading that stuff every day. And so I started to be like, well, if these guys can do it, I can bang out a page of jokes before like my duties for the day start with like Dave arriving at 9 o'clock. So I would like come in early, get all the newspapers, Dave's newspapers, because I wasn't gonna like pay for them myself. I didn't have the extra $2. I would get Dave's newspapers, comb through them, pick out premises, write a page of jokes, and then I was like giving them to Bill Sheft and being like, hey, can you, I know you're busy, but like when you get a sec, can you look at these and see like what holds up and what doesn't work? And he was so great about it. Such a lovely and generous thing to do. And then one day he just was like, they got to talk to you, like in the middle of the day near rehearsal. And I was like, okay. And he was like, your jokes have been really good lately. We were light on monologue jokes. So I put your jokes on blue paper. I passed them in. And he was like, don't get excited. Because here's the thing. A lot of jokes would be picked through the course of the day, and then they would get winnowed down. And so he was like, I put a page of your jokes in. They don't have your name on it. So, you know, let's not worry about it. But then after he was like, he checked off 2 of your jokes on your page. And I was like, oh my God. And he was like, don't get excited. You know, it gets winnowed way down. And so I was like, okay. And so
I'm going to interject here. Don't get excited. It's 27 years later and I'm excited right now. Holy shit. Like,
I know, kind of wild. It's so wild. And then so later he came back from rehearsal and he was like, one of your jokes like made it. Like it's going to the show. And I was like, oh my God. And then he was like, so here's what I think we should do. If it goes badly, we just will like shrug our shoulders
just
and pretend
move
it
on.
never happened. Yeah. If it goes well, I think we should, after the show, go into Dave's office and tell him what we did. And I was like, we didn't do anything. You have done this, sir. You have done it. And he was like, okay, okay, okay. But so it was something.
You were the last vestige of cover in case that didn't work. It's a we thing. No, it's
a we thing.
Dave.
We schemed. So so anyway, the joke went on the show. It was about like, it was something about OJ and Kato Kalin. I can't remember specifically what the joke was. But it got a laugh. And so then we went in and Dave was like, you were absolutely right not to tell me that it was you because it just would have been weird. And I would have had like weird, like, who knows what would have happened, but it just would have been weird. Like, you know, either I would have picked it to be nice to you and then gotten nervous and can't, who knows.
Yeah, there would have been something else there.
Yeah,
and he was
weirdness.
famous for that. Like we've talked to people. Mark Malkoff, who worked for there for a year, was in the audience. He worked for David Kaye's department, and he talked about like even having certain familiar faces in the sight line. You know, it would that would get in his head for that kind of reason. I think that's a great example of how that thinking is from another perspective of the show, knowing whose joke it was. You know, he had to deal with that with Johnny for sure, knowing it was Johnny's joke. You know, and so that's a great point.
And I think he did it, you know, probably out of like a protectiveness from, because weirdly, I think he kind of like divided people into, and I'm going to be honest, I think he divided women into like women that were like being mentored by him and that like women that like made him nervous or something. I don't know. You know what I mean? Because he'd be the first ever to be like, oh, Julia Roberts like wants to go to dinner. I'd rather wax all my hair off my body or whatever, you know, but I wasn't like in the type of women that made him nervous, I don't think. I think like so I think he was like nervous for me. I think he was either nervous about you or nervous for you. And so I think I fell into the camp of nervous for you. And so I think anything that he would have done would have been like in an attempt to be protective. Whether or not that's like what I would have wanted him to do or whatever. But so anyway, in that instance, he was like, you did the right thing. So then it was really nice because Barbara Gaines like wrote up a freelance writer contract for me and how much I was going to get paid for every joke that I had on the show. And then I just, submitted jokes like in between doing writing letters and getting lunches and stuff like that. So that was
And
cool.
figuring out who's going to get $75 because their joke was from a fax perspective put in and all that. Like,
Right.
what a crazy world. I mean, okay, I'm blown away by this. Now, we're going to come back to some of these Letterman stories, but I feel compelled to make sure that we talk about the evolution outside of Late Show for you into what you're doing now with Busy. And I mean, clearly we're seeing a beautiful launching pad that's been built. Don Giller gets mad at me every time I do this because I put you on the spot and I say I hope one day we can do this again and we can talk about more of these amazing stories here, and we will before the show's over today. But
of course,
but please come back so we can talk about more about this time.
I'd be happy to.
But at the same time, I love the fact that so many folks came on the show. We had Kellison on not too long ago, and I mean the idea, again, a guy right out of the intern program. We haven't had Brian Teta on, but he and I've communicated a couple times. Again, people who have come on the show. Some, it doesn't matter how long they stayed in what capacity, but the tools that they were given to then go, whether you're a writer, whether it was whatever it was, segment producer, and then move on and grow and evolve into something like, again, talking about a college that prepped you for bigger things. And I mean, you've become a showrunner since this has happened.
Yeah.
Like, holy shit. Fantastic. And it's just a testament to the things that you learned there, and then the things obviously after that and your skill set. After Letterman, how long did you stay at Rosie?
I was at Rosie the entire time, and Daniel Kellison is who hired me. Daniel Kellison was our showrunner.
Yep.
And he had made an agreement not to hire anyone from The Late Show. And Daniel and I weren't like BFFs at, it wasn't like, he wasn't like, I have to bring Caissie with me or whatever. He just called and said, listen, I made an agreement when I left the show not to hire anyone from Late Show, but I've been meeting with Rosie. She needs an assistant. I just think she'd really like you. If you are at all interested in that lateral move, I will personally call Dave and ask if it's okay to make an exception, because we don't want to step on anyone's toes, but I think she'll really like you. And so that is what we did. And and so I got hired as Rosie's assistant again on a brand new show that was like an instant smash hit. But the difference is that while I don't want to say languished, because 3 years is not a long time and I was a young person.
Sure.
But I did see, again, guys my age getting made writers at The Late Show that I believed had less experience than I did at the time.
Yeah.
And, and Dave and I talked about it at the time. And he kind of was like, it's kind of like out of my hands. Like, I don't make those decisions, Mm-hmm. And he was like, and yes, I am the boss. And yes, I could say you have to make her a writer. But then what is your life going to be like? Like working with a bunch of people that are like, Dad said we had to make her a writer. You know what I mean?
Is he throwing you into a Shark Tank, essentially?
Exactly. Out of protectiveness, I think he sort of like took his hands off. So 3 years on, I was like, I'm willing to pay my dues, but I think I'm paying my dues like I think I am, and I'm seeing
Well,
guys
maybe you
who,
have paid your dues.
yeah, yeah.
Maybe
And
that's just that natural progression, and
yeah,
you have paid
yeah.
them at that point.
Yeah, and so I was like, I'm seeing guys that are younger than me and that have less experience on this show and at all than I do,
Yep.
lapping me. And I don't think it's that they're more talented than I am. I don't think so. So yeah, maybe I'm gonna go to this new show and try my luck. And so I started as Rosie's assistant, and I like to say she like fired slash promoted me within a month because she was like, "You're too tough." She was like, "You're too tough. You are like, you're very precise. I'm much more casual, but I really like you and I like having you work here." So like I think I was like made an associate producer very briefly,
Awesome.
and then a writing spot came open and they did like anonymous submissions and I got that writing spot. So I was like, I just remember our business affairs office being like, your file is so thick, this is like your fourth job on this show inside of 6 months. Like,
But
wild,
it's a
but
new
yeah.
show, and I mean, you've got people who they're figuring shit out. Stuff is
Yes.
it's like you've kicked up a lot of sand on the bottom of the below the surface of the water, and you're just watching it settle to see how it all lays.
Yeah, and I
I'm
had an
grateful that very quickly that
advantage.
happened for you.
Yeah, I had a real advantage because the thing, every new host does this. If anyone's listening who's thinking of becoming a host of something, maybe we can break the cycle. Every new host hires a handful of their performer friends to be writers, and it so often doesn't work out for a couple reasons, because the person's a performer and they have to go off and do that, and that's their dream.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's very nice to have a job that pays very well and that is steady. But the thing is, like a lot of performers, like I have to go audition, I have to go shoot this thing, I have to, so they're not there a lot. So they can't become indispensable in
Yes.
many ways. And then also they're performers, so they know how stand-up comedy clubs work and they know how like being in improv groups or whatever it is they do, they know how that works, but they're brand new to a television show. Whereas even though I was just a kid, I already had like 3 years of television show experience under my belt. And I was like, oh, this is like, there are times that things are due. And this is like, in order to get like a monologue that's 6 jokes long, this is
Yeah.
probably the amount of pages that we're gonna, need worth of material to. So like I knew a lot of that and was able to just generate. And so when I became a writer there, yeah, it was just like, I guess I just kind of hit the ground running because I had had like a front row seat to knowing how that worked.
And
I
were
thought
you
I was failing constantly, but
isn't that funny perspective, right? When you look back and you see that you were actually growing, but at the time, like it's that again, that personal, that old age old, you're either winning or you're learning. There isn't
yes,
failure if you choose to not look at failure
right.
as that word. You're learning something, and it's so funny our perspectives of things. You clearly were learning so much, and I love this because I'm about to say something which I'm almost positive is true. The moment you got thrown into the seat, you were driving. Like the moment you were ready for it, and you delivered. It sounds
Yeah,
like.
I mean, Rosie was a wild trip, right? Because Dave was like, I would never think that I would say this, but Dave was so much more leisurely because it didn't tape until 5:30 in the afternoon.
Yep.
And so rehearsal wasn't until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And,
Yep.
so it was so much more leisurely. Rosie was live on the air, live at 10 a.m. in New York City, and
Yes.
it had to be done.
Yes.
So we had to just go in so much earlier and we had to generate so much more quickly and get it approved and get it polished and get it produced and get it on the air because we're also trying to be topical. And
Yep.
so it was like, it was really a baptism by fire. And Rosie was so great because, as I said, like I thought I was very nervous about like, how am I doing? Because I really was just a kid. And this was her first TV show too. At some point, she said to our head writer, Jeanette Barber, why is Caissie so nervous? Like her hands shake when she pitches in the morning. And it's weird because we know each other and like we like each other. And I'm not trying to be scary or whatever. Why do you think she's so nervous? And Jeanette was like, well, you know how it is. They're on 13-week contracts. And Rosie was like, no, I actually don't know about this. Explain this to me because like this is my first TV show
Oh,
like
shit.
this. And Jeanette was like, we pick them up for 13 weeks at a time. And if you don't generate enough or you don't have enough successes in the 13 weeks, then your option's not renewed. And then that's it. It's a wrap. And so she was like, so she's a few weeks in. And I'm sure on days when she doesn't get anything on the show, she feels like it's, that spells doom or whatever. And Rosie was like, oh, okay. Thank you for explaining that to me because that is not something that I was aware of prior to then.
Yeah.
And then she said, do me a favor, go to business affairs and ask them to write up a contract for her for 2 years. Then go have her sign it and tell her to relax and learn how to do this job. And so I was able to relax and learn how to do that job.
I I want to kind of set the table for what the time that this is happening. Like, I can't wait for the time that we have a major, well, and late night's changing so much right now anyway. I'm super curious as to how things are going to go. Can't wait to have Bill Carter on and discuss this stuff with
Yeah.
him because it's fascinating. Like, it's a fascinating time in late night right now, and what it's going to look like a year and a half, 2 years from now, we don't know. But I'm going on the assumption that late night is still going to be a thing. And I have been waiting for the first Uber late night host that is a woman. I'm excited about it. Like the one that is
Yeah.
just the one that punches through, and because it will be a culmination of Rosie during the day. Like, and I mean,
Yeah.
there's examples before that, but Rosie during the day, and I'm just talking our lifetime.
Yeah.
Rosie during the day, Ellen during the day, and you look at the smash hits and the following and all of that, and the personality that it takes to be accepted, the times changing, all of these things, and learning to do the job. I love that she, in my mind, is setting the table for when this does happen, and for your
Yeah.
sake and everybody's sake. And she's talented as fuck. I hope it is busy. I hope.
Yeah,
I
it's
really do.
interesting. I mean, like, Busy Tonight, the show that I was the showrunner of with Busy Phillips, who's
Yep.
my partner on her podcast, and creatively we have remained partners. We were friends before. She, Tina Fey, and I were the executive producers of Busy Tonight, and it felt kind of shitty to have that show canceled after 6 months, after
Yep.
two 13-week cycles. But also we were in good company. That's how long Joan Rivers lasted.
Well,
Like
and I think hold on a
that's
second. If you look at Rose, what Rosie did for you, maybe it might be time again. The way that, well, and let's go back to Letterman. Like, Leno got his ass handed to him the first 18 months or whatever it was that you guys were doing your thing,
right.
but NBC
And
gave him time to find his
right.
voice. His he was the lead-in for an even bigger story when it came to that with Conan O'Brien.
Conan sweated through his suit for 2 years.
Until those 13-week commitments, and some of them were week by week. We've had people who've on the show that worked on that show. It was week by week. Well, guess what? You can't learn how to do the job when that is happening. And to me, E didn't give, or whoever it was that made the decision, didn't give you guys the ability to find your voice at that point.
Well, we see it. I mean, like, this is, a little bit of something that, like, this is a fun podcast and we're talking about fun things, but this has been a weird thing for me. Late night and comedy variety is something that I've devoted my life to, and it's been my entire career. And it's something I'm really passionate about. But then also as a woman, it is wild to me in 2022, we have 2 women who have late night shows right now. We just lost Samantha Bee, which I wouldn't categorize as a strictly late night show. It was more of a political, a political satire show, in my opinion. But we're going to counter, right? But we just lost Samantha Bee. So now we have Amber Ruffin and Zue, and they're both once a week
Yeah.
on apps,
Yep.
and so I'm like, what the fuck is that?
Yeah.
Like what? That's insane. And so, and I think like Lily Singh, okay, she wasn't successful over on NBC, and they gave her, what was she on, a year
I
to,
think
I
she
don't
had a
know,
full year.
a full year.
Did you
But
watch that show?
I did watch it sometimes.
Me
I
too.
just
I tried
think
to give
it's
it a
like,
chance as much as I could. I just
yes,
didn't
and
connect with it personally, but
exactly. And I
yeah.
think it was one of those things where they were like, maybe like, listen, Lily Singh is a huge star. She was a huge star on YouTube. She
Yep.
didn't actually need the smaller audience of that time slot
That's right.
on television. And so I think they were trying to like, leverage her YouTube success, not realizing like, it doesn't translate in the same way. And so I actually, my heart went out to her because like, on YouTube, it was about Lily Singh. And
Yes.
so then when you sit her down and tell her to interview Selma Hayek or, whoever she's interviewing, that's just not something that she had been doing. And it would take her time to, and again, like it would take her time to develop a comedic voice that would like appeal to a television audience. And so
Yes.
they made such a big deal of the fact that they gave the show to her, but they didn't make a big deal of her and like teaching her, or just letting her find her groove.
Yep.
She didn't need to be taught anything. She needed to be allowed to find her groove. But how are you going to do that when you just know that your show is like a ticking time bomb? I
Yeah.
just And so that has never happened for very many women. I know
No.
we've been lucky. I think Monique had a late night show for several years, and Wanda Sykes had a late night show for several years, but
Yeah.
never certainly, on a major network every single night, like where it's not a 50-50 situation. We there were multiple Jimmys, like that's like Busy and I always joke about how there were like double the amount of Jimmys than there were women in late night at all, and we love them. We love a Jimmy, but
Sure.
it's just, so I don't know where it's going. But I do know that, and this is something that I've talked about a lot on the podcast, like I'm increasingly like looking at TikTok and
Hmm.
Facebook where women are turning to like build their own table. So many women, especially over the pandemic, have come to podcasting not just as talent, but as audiences. And I think it's because television likes to leave things on the table sometimes. And
Mm.
the half of our country, half of our world are women who feel apparently underserved by and that is, as much as I loved Late Show and as much as I love the Jimmys and Conan and Steven, everyone who's ever had a late night show,
Yeah.
I've never felt like any of those were specifically for me. I
Yeah.
felt like, I was sort of appreciating what I could about them. That's one reason I love the thing that Seth Meyers does, where he has like his writers out to do material that he could never
Stuff I
do.
can't. Yeah. Material I can't say. Whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah,
Stuff I can't
yeah.
say.
And so I think that's
Genius.
such a
Genius bit. Yep.
genius bit,
Yep.
because, my philosophy that I developed really early on working for Rosie was like, oh, here's the recipe for success. On this show, we need to do something that could not or would not be done on any other show, and run with it and run it all the way to the field goal.
Well,
And
I want to just throw something back to what you just said before
sure.
because I want to continue on this. The other thing about that bit that I love so much is it also feels like the show's name, the heritage of it's 40 years old. It's late night.
Yeah.
And I think don't get me wrong. I like what Jimmy did with it. I love what Conan did with it. I thought Conan continued on what late night was. Jimmy's show was very different than what late night was.
Yeah.
I could see David Letterman back then, if they had thought of saying stuff I couldn't say, although back then he could almost say anything. Times have changed so much.
Yeah.
I could see him at late night doing that bit, and then you have Kathleen anchors come out and say something,
Right.
or if there were female writers at that point, wherever the equivalent was. And he did that with people like Barbara Gaines along the way,
Yeah.
and all of that. That Seth doing that feels like it is a real nod, and I don't recognize Late Night with Seth Meyers the way that I recognize Late Night with David Letterman very often. That is one of the few examples where I think that it actually translates to the show itself. So I just wanted to throw that out there real quick, but I want to go back to, you know, do you think it's going to take, like, again, doing this work 5 nights a week, 4 nights a week, whatever it is, it's grueling. You're mining for gold and then taking the gold and throwing it on the ground so you can go mine for new gold. Like, it's
Right.
hectic, it's breakneck.
Yeah.
I almost feel like it's going to take someone like Tina Fey or Amy Poehler or someone like that who is already at the mountain going, okay, I'm going to host a late night show now, and then and break through, or break the glass, whatever you want to call it. I almost feel like one of the ways that this could actually happen is if someone like that would be the flag bearer.
Yeah.
But people who are at that level, like, people talk about Seinfeld having a late night show. I don't want to work that hard.
I don't want to do that. Tina doesn't need to do that.
Right?
Well, they're both really busy doing the things that they do, and like trying to also make shows for other people to
they're
rise.
world makers already.
Yeah, rise to that level. So, yeah, and I imagine there probably would have been a time where I could ask her, I could text her and ask, was there ever a time, Tina, when you would have jumped onto a late night show and like taken it, like tried to helm a late night show? And
would you have taken over for Dave if given the opportunity?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, like, if that time ever existed where Tina was like, yeah, I could see myself doing a late night show, if at that point the powers that be were like, no, she's not ready, or you know what I mean? Like, there's this
to which I would have said, fuck you. Holy shit, are you kidding me?
This
what does someone have to do to show that they're ready? Oh my God.
There's this readiness thing, with women. Like, I think that women are seen as, and this isn't universal, certainly. I don't think everyone thinks this.
Yeah.
And I don't think that it's the case every time, but I do think that there's a trend where we think women aren't ready for anything for like way too long, until they're way, 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 way too overqualified compared to like their peers in that. And then we think they're too old, So like the window in which a woman can do anything is like, feels like a year, and then, and we just haven't cracked it yet. The presidency, I've always said that like late night television is a lot like the presidency. Everybody dreams of becoming that one day.
Wow.
And we haven't had a woman do it yet. So, only a few people get to do it. And so far, not a woman for a very long time.
I wonder, like, this conversation makes me wonder if it's something that, because I think it's important. It needs to happen. I want it to happen. Like,
of course,
I adore Tina Fey. Like that. There's an example of somebody who I worship the comedy ground that she walks on. I love.
She's a machine.
Oh my God, and I love 30 Rock. And oh, so she's just an example of quite a few that I have this regard for. I can't wait to see it. I always wonder if it's something as simple as the demo. Like women don't enjoy staying up to watch this stuff versus men, and that skews it right there. Or is it just so intrinsically the way that it's always been? And I'm not trying to throw anybody on any buses, but or is it just we need to change the entire culture, or is it a combination of both? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a lot of things. I think studies have shown that women have less free time during the day to expend on watching television. I think it's about an hour. Women have like an hour less that they can devote to leisure. I think that It's something that we're not used to, but again, prior to Conan O'Brien, we'd never had a redheaded talk show host either, and he took some getting used to. So, I think it's that. I think it's bias. I think some is obvious bias and some is not. When
Yep.
uh he had me doing press for Busy Tonight, and I remember talking to a journalist who said asked me the question, so Conan does his podcast and Jimmy Fallon does his like bonus material on YouTube, and he was naming all these things, all these adjuncts that all these late night hosts do to extend their brands.
Yes.
But Busy is a mother and she's very busy, but is there anything like that she would do if she had the time?
It's an
And I
interesting
was like,
precursor to that question.
sir, all of those people you just named are also parents.
Yeah.
They also should be busy raising their children. They should be, but it's just like that's
Yeah.
like just an attitude that guy woke up with that day. Like, this woman should be watching her kids, but if she didn't have to, if she had the luxury of pawning her kids off onto a staff, what would she do to make me more interested in her? And so,
I have a size 12 foot, and God knows I know how to put it in my mouth. I swear to God, that is one of the places that I fear the very most, that I put my foot in my mouth and say something like that. If I ever do something like that, it's obviously going to be inadvertent, because I don't think I'm a pretty thoughtful man,
yeah,
who isn't a monster. And again, I host a men's mental wellness podcast,
sure.
but I see, due to the pathways that have been created in the time that we were raised, again, Gen Xer, raised, some of us were raised on Porkies and meatballs.
Yeah, sure.
And so, but that question literally made shivers go up my spine. And I fear that I'm going to be one of those guys that inadvertently says something just because of the pathways that have been created in my head growing up.
Right. Well, just the fact that you fear it is
astounding
like,
to me.
there's just the fact that you would even like worry that you would say something like that is like, that's encouraging to me. You know what I mean?
Small step, Caissie.
Some people I think are just like, no, that's really, that's how it is. Like, just these are really locked into and so it's hard to break out of. It's really hard to break out of. And then the thing that I mentioned earlier, like sort of feeling like when I'm watching late night, like a lot of it is very funny to me, but some of it I'm like, this isn't for me, and it isn't exactly addressing my needs as a viewer and what I want to see as a viewer. And like, I get that, right? Because like, clearly, as I was saying, like my guy classmates from college were like, oh, did you see Letterman last night? He did this. Like, I can't think of a more genius idea than a top 10 list to appeal to guys who love ranking things in lists more than anything, more than I've ever loved anything. Any member of my family, a guy loves to make a list, and so that so makes sense. You know what I mean? It's like if we're ever at a cocktail party together, keep your eyes on me, because if two guys start talking about like the top 5 guitar soloists of all time, even though I do have like expertise, I feel, to contribute to that conversation, I will straight up walk away from the conversation, because there's no way I'm ever getting in on it. There's no way they're going to let me contribute one of the top 5 guitarists of all time.
Okay, I'm fascinated by this. First off, because you said that there's a potential for you and I to be at a cocktail party together, which I hope happens.
I hope
that'll
so
be
too.
fun. I feel like we're going to be at the Muppet Show. I think we're going to be, the old men up there, Stadler and Waldorf. Waldorf. Yeah. We're going to be up there. I would love that. That would be that's my idea of a fun evening. But second, that astounds me, because you have such a perfect perspective. As you said, let's, to guys talking about, these guitar solos. First off, I'm a huge music guy, so I'm like, oh, I want to get in on this right now. But second, I love like I say this about my wife all the time. I got a wife that will play Mario Kart with me for a half hour before we go to bed. Like I've hit the jackpot
Dream life.
when I yes, and when I okay, you talk about the top 5 guitar solos. Not only would I be like, oh come on, let's talk about this because I want to know the different perspective.
Yeah.
But that's astounding to me that you have the wherewithal or the present the ability to be so present and aware that uh, you don't think that you would get a word in, which goddamn, we got to change that shit. Because to me, the collaboration and the different opinions are that's color. That's living life in color rather than black and white, as far as I'm concerned. I love that we're talking about this. Oh my God, this is such a great conversation. And I appreciate the fact that you are a standard bearer for this. You are somebody who is literally it's gone beyond, oh yeah, I was a writer for a late night show, I was a showrunner and all that. You're helping to rewrite the culture out there when it comes to this and make it better.
I'm
Um,
trying. I'm trying. I'm at least
yeah.
trying to point it out. I mean, when, Meryl Marcoe, we've talked, there is no Dave. There is no
Nope.
original morning show or late show in the way that we know it without Meryl Marcoe. And I'd like to
Yes.
remind people that she's basically the mother of modern late night television.
Yep.
And, she's like, she invented stupid pit tricks,
Yes.
like that she was the brains in many ways. And I think Dave would say that, but it's just this thing where like, people are focusing on him and of course he's the star, he's the talent.
Sure.
But it's a weird thing to me, yeah, that it's still so hard to get in on that conversation.
So
Not
I
just
want to.
about,
Oh God. Okay. I apologize for interrupting.
no, that's
Um,
okay.
I want to ask you this question about Ellen, and then I want to go back to what you were just saying. Okay,
Okay,
because
sure, sure.
it's such a. I loved Ellen's show.
Yeah.
I didn't watch it every day. I've got a financial firm and other things that I do
Yeah,
and all that
yeah.
stuff. So I didn't watch it every day, but I would make a point of it would be on the PVR and I would make a point to go through. Like I really enjoyed Ellen's show.
Yeah.
Now, my question for you, because you are an educated answerer when it comes to this, I always said to myself that there could be the argument to be made that because the David Letterman show in the morning, it was so foreign, it was a different time. I get it.
Yeah.
Did not work at all. However, basically the exact same show became a culture changing smash hit at late night.
Right.
Okay, as far as I'm concerned with Ellen, we talk about this progression that has happened along the way, of which Rosie became, and then I think Ellen then came in afterwards and smashed even harder.
Yeah.
I have asked myself, would Ellen's show have been a hit at late night, or is it really just the fact that late show would not be a hit during the day and Ellen would not be a hit at night for some of these just the culture that we live in and the demographics and all of that kind of stuff? Do you think Ellen would have been a hit at night?
That's a really good question. Let me go back a little bit myself and say, without Rosie, there was no Ellen.
Yes.
Rosie would never say this. I'm saying this. Rosie was the template for Ellen.
Totally.
And
100%.
and it was a smash success.
Yep.
It remained a smash success the entire time. She left of her own accord because it
Yep.
was a lot of work and she just wanted to have a quieter life. And Telepictures signed up Ellen, and it's a lot of the same producers, a lot of the same. And so I think the spirit of the show, Rosie was the template for Ellen.
Yep.
I think Rosie did a lot of amazing other things that aren't exactly a match for like Ellen's skills. And I think Ellen then brought a lot of things that were like her unique skills to that
Yeah.
show.
But they're two
That being
completely different stand-ups as well, by the way. Like, and so
exactly,
it's the voice thing
exactly.
we were talking about.
Yeah. But same company, same kind of like
Yeah.
ethos. I think that Fallon is basically Ellen and Rosie. And I
Oh, isn't that interesting? Yeah.
I think that it is. And I think there is no probably Fallon without Ellen or Rosie. And so then the question becomes, does it work in late night because it's a guy, or does it work in late night because they gave that guy a chance to keep doing it?
Right.
Or does it, would it work in the daytime? And those daytime, nighttime, like linear times, like they become less and less important, right? Because like everybody just watches things when they
With the
watch
DVR and
them.
the internet, all
Yeah,
that stuff, YouTube, all that.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So those things, like, I mean, my kids don't even call shows, like they don't call them TV shows.
Yeah.
They just, because they
Yeah.
just call them shows because they don't watch them on TVs normally.
Yeah.
So they're all very, very close kissing cousins, those three shows. And so the question is, would Ellen have worked in late night? Would Jimmy have worked in the daytime?
Yeah.
Does Jimmy work at night because he is a guy? Does Ellen work during the day because she's Ellen? I don't know. We'll never know the answers really because no one ever tried it,
Yeah.
And I can't say that I can blame anyone. Like, why would Ellen try to like jump her show from daytime to nighttime? But what I can say is, and listen, my heart goes out to anyone that feels like they had a rough time at Ellen. I know a lot of the folks that worked there. I love a lot of the folks that worked there. But am I also like, did she get a worse rap for like,
Yeah.
for like, people are like, she was, the queen of nice. And I'm like, no, actually Rosie was the queen of nice, but she was also tough, she was a tough business lady.
Yeah.
But like
You have
people
to
were
be.
exactly. And
You have
people
to
are
be
like,
in that role, no matter who it is.
Ellen presented herself as nice, but it turns out that maybe she wasn't nice. And I'm like, how many conversations are we having about how nice guys are behind the scenes at their late night shows? Like, we've never, I mean, a little bit, I guess there have been like little things that have, not little, but there have been things that have happened behind the scenes at shows here and there. But I'm thinking like in my entire lifetime, maybe like once or twice, did any news about any guy TV host, comedy variety host, did like their behavior made news only a couple times.
It's and that's something that needs to be shorn up as well. And I think in this culture that we live in right now, the pendulum has swung so far in this direction in so many different things, that I think that the truth or the lessons that need to be learned are kind of over here.
Yeah.
and
by the way, one of the lessons that we need to learn is that everyone needs to treat everyone like fucking gold behind the scenes. Duh. But I'm just saying, when we're talking about inequality,
yes,
there's been plenty of bad behavior, but I've really only seen one person's behavior repeatedly picked apart. And I'm not condoning anyone's bad behavior if that allegedly happened. I'm just saying, there's been plenty of bad behavior.
Yeah. And I'm glad that things are being talked about and an awareness is being created. So hopefully things moving forward, I love that we've evolved. We talk about this on the Men's Mental Wellness podcast all the time. The example of fathers that we have seen, as Gen Xers. Versus, like, I think about Bill Burr's show F is for Family, and he basically is just telling anecdotes from his life growing
up.
and I think that many times, these examples that we've been given, and how we've evolved because of them, aren't given consideration for the fact that, hey, at least we're evolving, at least we're becoming aware of this stuff, and at least now once we're aware of it, we can then start patching holes in the bottom of the rowboat and making things better. You are certainly doing that. We could do this all day. I fucking love this podcast. This is so good. I love them all, but again, this one is just it's so special to me, having you on here, and I just appreciate everything that you're doing. I want to ask kind of two more questions about the present, and then I want to go back to one thing. There's one thing I gotta ask you about.
Okay,
about Prince.
Okay.
And So you and Busy doing your thing, and I'm going to truncate it just for the sake of time a little bit. Correct me if I get any mistakes here.
Sure.
Busy gets the show. It isn't given the time to find its voice.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, cut short. You two are like, no, we've got this synergy. We're in a place where we want to keep things moving forward, and so and then the pandemic hits.
Yeah.
The podcast comes out, and it's lovely. It's fantastic. Highly
You.
recommended. We're going to put links to this in our, and who are we got nothing right yet, but it's coming. It's totally coming. We're going to put links to it and all that. 9 episodes in, 10 episodes in, something like that, you have David Letterman as a guest on the podcast. He
Yes.
famously does not do these things unless you're Al Franken, National Public Radio, or something that is really, I hate using this term when it comes to Dave, on brand.
Yeah.
He doesn't do this stuff.
Yeah.
And yet here it is. He comes on, I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, he's doing his old friend and mentee, Caissie, a solid, making Busy go, holy shit, David Letterman's coming on the podcast. Thank you, buddy. Like, to me, that's how that goes. Correct me if any of those things are wrong. And second, how did it feel to have him on there all these years later, having learned all the lessons that you've learned? It's a fantastic episode. We're gonna link to it. Highly recommend it to any Letterman fan to listen to. I love it so much because of the things that you guys talk about. It's playful and irreverent, but then it also gets kind of deep, and there's some substance stuff there too. How did that feel for you?
Well, it's always wonderful to feel like a grown-up around someone that you were such a kid. Like I had grown up. We can actually back up a tiny bit, is that when Busy Tonight was still on the air, I got a phone call one day. And I picked up the phone, and he said, Caissie, this is Dave Letterman. We used to work together. Do you remember me? And I said, yes, we have spoken since those days a few times. And he was like, listen, anyway, he was like, I just want to say congratulations on this show, Busy Tonight. Someone told me to check it out because it reminded them of the energy of the morning show. And I was watching an episode, and I was like, I dig this show. I like this lady that's hosting it. It's fun. And then I see, holy shit, my old assistant is the showrunner. And he was like, I'm going to be coming to LA in the next couple weeks. Can I be a guest on the show? And I said, I would love that so much. Unfortunately, the show has already been canceled. And like the morning show, it does have that same energy, the canceled energy. So, so we won't be able to have you as a guest on the show. And he was like, shoot, well, can I do anything? Can I? And I was like, we have this phone called the Oprah phone. Oprah's called on it. Maybe you would want to call on the Oprah phone. And he was like, oh no, I can't call on the Oprah phone. And he was like, I'm going to just send a video. And so he sent a video just like roasting E, being like, hey, Busy, it's Dave Letterman. I love your show. It's so great. E is so stupid, because at that point Busy had said publicly the show's canceled.
It's Conan talking about NBC when his Tonight Show got canceled. Like,
yeah, exactly.
All gloves are off. Yeah.
And he was like, you'll be fine. I don't know what's going to happen with E. I mean, they clearly make bad decisions. So, but he was like, I just wanted to say I'm a fan. And like, I was looking forward to coming on the show. So we'll just have to do something else together. So that was really cool. And I think it was like especially cool for Busy because like her parents were huge Dave fans.
She cried talking about it on the podcast.
Yeah.
Like, it really right to the heart.
Yeah, so that was lovely, and that was a lovely thing to do. But also, what you didn't see on the show is that when he did come to LA, he was like, I want you to like meet with my producers and just talk about your ideas, and because he had his Netflix show happening, and so besides what happened on the air and what happened on the podcast, he also like just set us up with a meeting, and talking to like his Netflix exec and just people that he knew and stuff, where it just felt good for us to say, like, here's the parts of the show that we loved, that we think women deserve to have, deserve to have every day. Here's what we think. And it was just really helpful to like solidify those ideas and have people be like, yeah, that's right. That's what was good about that show that you were making.
Yeah.
And so yeah, then our original idea was to just try to continue the show, but like not necessarily on television,
Yep.
because who needs a network anymore,
That
people are.
spirit, I think, survives into the podcast, by the way.
Yeah.
I think that is maybe if there's an epicenter of the fire that is burning, that is your show. I think that's probably what it is. The idea of, you're winning or you're learning. Well, we've learned that this is awesome, and we're just going to keep it going.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
like, and giving people what they want, and also like doing what we want. And we produce the podcast independently. We
Yep.
we had been doing it with a company, and then when that deal was up, we met with a number of other companies that I think like we could have had a good time working with. But we were like, actually, it'd be like kind of an adventure to figure out how to do this on our own.
Hmm.
But also we could figure out like what's real and what's bullshit, because we
Yeah.
didn't know. We were new to the podcast game. And so, yeah, so we learned like a lot of the things that people tell you, like cost $1 million, or that you have to do. You're doing a podcast right here. Do you have like a giant conglomeration?
Not
you
yet.
know
Hey,
yeah,
Walter.
exactly.
Hey, Walter. No, I'm actually saying that, but I'm also serious. Like Jay Ryan does the Cars and Comedy show. We've got some other people. We're actually actively talking about the idea of the Letterman Podcast Network, and doing kind of the Team Coco model, but with creators who are doing exactly what you're talking about
Yeah, I
here,
love it.
and having something like that in place, because having some infrastructure is great, but it's got to be on our terms, because we got to still have that freedom to be able to
Right.
do that, where you cut through all that bullshit you're talking about here,
Right.
to actually get that content out the way you want it to be, and with its own voice, having the time to find its own voice. You're preaching to the choir right now. That
Yeah.
is exactly what we're trying to do here.
We were just like, we want to be able to say when we're canceled. That was like the bottom line. We want to be the ones to say, okay, let's call it on this.
Yes.
And it's been a couple years, and we are still doing it. And so again, building our own small table that doesn't look exactly like the table we all envisioned for
Yeah.
ourselves to be sitting at, but also there's the way that we've done it, there's no one to try to talk over. I'm not trying to join a conversation about the 5 best guitarists to no avail.
By the way, do you have a favorite guitar solo of all time?
A favorite guitar solo of all time? I mean, Prince's guitar solo in Purple Rain is amazing. But it's actually, you'll want to watch the first time the song's performed at First Avenue in Minneapolis, the first time that he was like debuting his band with Wendy Melvoin joining. That's a really exciting version of that guitar solo. I know Purple Rain is like so basic for like a Prince fan, but I'm saying that because everybody's familiar with it.
Caissie.
Yeah, and they can sort of have some familiarity with it and be like, yeah, I know that song. I don't want to name some obscure song that no one's going to know, but I do encourage you to look up the initial performance of Purple Rain at First Avenue with, I believe she was 19-year-old Wendy Melvoin, debuting with The Revolution.
Oh my God. I adore you. I adore this. This is so much fun. And the next time you come on, and there will be a next time if I have anything to say about it, let's talk. Let's go obscure. Let's talk about obscure stuff. It's I would love to do that. But anyway, you again, it's like you're a professional. Holy cow, I know how to segue. We talk about the Prince story again. Everybody, after, not now, obviously, wait till the podcast is done. No, wait, hold on. After you like, share, subscribe, so I don't ever have to ask you to do that again. Once we get a certain, then I don't have to ask.
Also, download it, folks. Download it.
There you go.
It matters.
and the YouTube and share it and all of the things. And anyway, after you, hopefully you've watched it actually beforehand. Caissie talks about on her favorite moments that Walter and the team have put up on the Letterman channel on the YouTube. She talks about the story with Prince. You're all wet. I'm okay. Phenomenal. Way to speak to a demigod. The question I have for you, he performed now that there's some the famousness about everything, and then there's some infamy about everything.
Sure.
You were the gal who at that time was also getting Dave coffee and also making sure everything was copacetic. Prince called an audible during that performance where he didn't have to go and maybe interact with Dave because he didn't like some of the things that were being said about the symbol.
Yeah.
That's the allegedly, but as reported on 60 Minutes. So I think it's
Yeah.
But you were there.
I was
Apparently,
there.
Prince yelling as he leaves. Apparently, Dave yelling in the hallway or something like that afterwards. Do you remember any of the static after that performance?
No, none of that happened. I don't think. Not to like call anyone out, that remembered it that way, because
Yes.
memory is a funny thing.
Yes.
But it was my job to stick by Dave's side when I worked there. And so when he went up to his dressing room, I was 2 steps behind him and stood outside his dressing room waiting for him to come out in what we used to call his play clothes, which would be sweatpants and Formula One racing t-shirt and sneakers. Yep. And there was no yelling, like irritated that in the segment, I think he had planned to go over and talk to Prince, the artist formerly known as Prince, and Prince mimed shooting himself in the head and got dragged off stage by 2 of the guys that were in his crew.
Yes.
And so that cut out the talking portion, and so that made the segment shorter. And so they had to make up time.
Frustrating,
and sort of
very frustrating in a production like that.
Yeah, a little frustrating, but nobody yelled at anyone. Dave would never yell at any. I'm not saying Dave would never yell at anyone. That's not true. Dave would never yell at a guest. Certainly. And some of them probably deserved to be yelled at, but never in all my time did I ever see him say anything rude or untoward to a guest. I said he's like the king of manners. And so not to like, and I know the guy that I'm saying that said that there was yelling, I'm a fan of his as well, and I love that guy. And so not to poo-poo his memory of how things happened, but there was no yelling. And also Prince, I think, was like a pretty shy guy. And so I'm sure in some ways he was just like always looking for ways to get out of talking to people, it is
much
weird.
Like Dave, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. It is weird to me that like Dave wasn't his favorite. And I also think Rosie wasn't his favorite, because he did repeatedly go on Leno over the years and repeatedly went on Ellen over the years, and didn't appear on Dave or Rosie that often. And I would have preferred had he made multiple appearances on both shows, but he was I think he I don't know, maybe it was like maybe his New York vibes made him nervous, or I don't know.
Magnetic polarity works both ways. It can put people together, and it can also, keep people apart, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Caissie, this has been an absolute delight for me. I think, you can probably see, I wear authenticity on my sleeve, and I'm just beaming, saying this has been so much fun. An honor. I'm not even being hyperbolous when I say this. An honor to talk to you about this. You are an extremely educated mind in this thing that so many of us love, which is late night entertainment and the talk show stuff, and have cut your teeth in the greatest franchise ever. And it's so fascinating to talk to folks who have done that. I just can't thank you enough for appearing on the Letterman podcast together. Anything else you want to throw out there before I do a quick outro and we can say our goodbye privately?
No, it's been my pleasure. I'm happy to come back. Yeah, I feel very lucky. I learned a lot there, and every time I talk to Dave, that is usually that's the overarching message is that I learned a lot there, and I didn't know shit the first day I got there about really anything, not just about television, but just about life and living anywhere besides adjacent to a farm. So yeah, so I learned a lot, and I feel very lucky for the lessons that I learned and continue to learn, even when they frustrate me,
Yeah.
as I think I expressed in this podcast. But maybe someone will learn a little something from me and will finally crack the code.
Inches forward, man. That's all everything is. And those inches have frustrations along the way because they're not happening fast enough. But yeah, I hear you and I appreciate what you're saying there so much. I believe what you just said, by the way, is people have always said to me, "Oh, you're going to get Dave one day." I don't know that that is going to happen. That's not the goal. The goal is to, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'd love to, and I
You
love my
love it.
moment with. I'll tell you one day about the moment that I had with him there, depicted in the
Oh,
pic behind us. But um, you know, I I have been preparing silently in my head in the background in case it ever happens, because you never know what might happen. And one of the things that I know intrinsically that I can't do is just throw out any compliments and talk about how great he is and all that kind of stuff, because that's just, it's common knowledge he hates that. But what you just said there, Caissie, I think is one of these rare things. I think it's a compliment that David Letterman would accept. And you talking about what you learned there and how I think he would actually accept that and take great pride in what you just said there. And it was so wonderfully said. Thank you so much for doing that at the end here. It's a great coda. This has been another episode of the Letterman podcast. Once again, until enough people have liked and shared it where I don't have to ask that anymore, would you mind liking whatever platform?
please like it. Please
Please
share
like
it.
it. Cross platforms, I don't care, however you want to do it. We're non-denominational here, whether it's the YouTubes, the Apples, the Spotify's, or anything else that you have consumed this lovely piece of content. No thanks to myself, all thanks to our guests, Caissie St. Onge, with a lovely name, not a weird name, a lovely name. um, I just thank you so much for coming on. I thank all the viewers and listeners. Thank you for the support so far. A special shout out to Don Giller again, who fact checks us. I appreciate that. This has been a great ride. The previous hour and a bit, or hour and a half, almost 2 hours actually, has been evidence of that. And thank you for joining us on it. This has been another episode of the Letterman podcast with Mike Chisholm. Coincidentally, I am Mike Chisholm. Thank you and good night.
Overcoat and underpants.